So I found another mini rant on my phone from early last month. It's mainly about Nipper. It's nothing special. Apologies for the bad quality. It does end abruptly because it was meant to be longer. I wasn't originally going to upload it. But whilst we're still in the limbo waiting for the next Nipper interview to happen, this is just a little mini rant. And also thanks to Liquid Bullet Productions. What do you believe will come first? The end of COVID? Or Nipper's Q&A part 2? The continuation and the answers we're all expecting and waiting for since New Year's Day and the original Q&A dropped, leaving us at the end with the revelation. I'm not even entirely sure if that's the right word, revelation, but the reveal that Sid Ellis, Steve's dad, was the shooter of Pat, Tony and Craig. This is another Essex boys case, Rant. This is all going to be about Nipper. Whilst we're in that limbo at the moment, waiting for the second Q&A, there are rumours that the Q&A could come in some form of documentary. And there are also rumours that the Q&A could take place down Workhouse Lane. Also, there's a rumour going around on Facebook that the Q&A could take place in what is believed to be the original Range Rover. There is a page on Facebook. There is a guy. He's in, I'm guessing, all of the Essex Boys Facebook groups. And he is meant to be the owner of the original Range Rover, which is a question that comes up nearly daily on the groups, and there is an MOT post that always tries to get this. I think people really always want to know the answer of where it is now. Is it really sat in a certain person's front garden that we're meant to believe? Shipped to Canada at one point. The person that is meant to own it now, that is going to let them use it in the interview. He is meant to be the person that was in Canada that had it shipped over to them, and now they're back in England. There's so many rumours about the original Range Rover. There's even a segment on the Truth DVD with Barry Dorman discussing how he had the chance to buy it back afterwards, and that the police cut it up whilst looking for DNA and whatever. And when he had the option of buying it back, there was meant to be still blood and all sorts of stuff I'm not going to go into. But whether it is the case and that person does own the original Range Rover, I don't know, because there is also the person that's in prison at the moment, and the Range Rover is meant to be in a lockup in Northamptonshire. The ongoing debate, which it's not even worth getting into, because there's never going to be a straight answer. The original Range Rover that this guy owns, that might be help supplying it for the Q&A, that's apparently going up in a raffle with the paper. I can't say if there's any truth in any of that. That's just what goes on. That's what gets stated by a certain person on Facebook, and it just goes round and round and round and round. And hopefully there will be some definitive answer. But can you really imagine if Nipper's next Q&A is down Workhouse Lane and he is in the Range Rover? To me, I don't know if that's in exactly good taste, considering. And I'm not entirely sure how Peter Theobald might take to driving past and seeing that down there. I mean, for Peter himself, that would be a very strange flashback. Obviously, the lane itself has changed a lot now. It's been widened. It's not really nothing. The top part of it's not really like it was originally. Only when you enter from the main road, the first part of it, leading around the first corner with the alternative lane, heading off towards what used to be the Wheatsheaf pub. And it would be quite a strange, especially if he didn't know, but for Peter to, just possibly be driving down that lane, and can you just really imagine if he hadn't seen Ken Jiggins for a long time? Ken popped round and drive down the lane, and happens to be a Range Rover parked up in the middle of the lane. I'm guessing they would shoot the right word to use. I guess they would shoot the Q&A exactly where the Range Rover was discovered, underneath that tree. And so for Peter to be driving down that lane that afternoon, or maybe even on foot, and to see the Range Rover, which is meant to be the original one, that would be a very strange flashback for Peter to see, to obviously being the person that discovered it with Ken. Now, talking about the discovery of the Range Rover that morning, as I mentioned on the last rant, there was the rumour that what the two farmers discovered wasn't exactly what we saw in the pictures, which is a strange thing to say, because why would that be? What would the farmers have discovered that morning? What would they have seen that the police or whoever wouldn't want to be seen in photographic evidence? But the two first attending officers that arrived that morning, that greeted Ken and Peter at the main road and then travelled down the lane with them, as far as I can tell, and I have looked quite a few times, and I don't know if I'm just going blind in glasses, which is probably the case, but the statements from the two attending officers, the first two attending officers that morning, they're not online either, and nor was Ken's. So out of the first four people that saw that Range Rover that morning, only one of them's statement is online. Now, Ken has mentioned what went on a documentary, which I think it was called Crime County Tonight or so. It is on YouTube. There is a reconstruction of the Range Rover at the gate with the Land Rover, with Ken and Peter pulling up behind it, which is different to what you see in the Rise of the Foot Soldier movie at the very beginning, when the farmers pull up in front of the gate with the Range Rover over the other side. And you're thinking, I thought he said this was a Nipper special, so why is he going on about he's not going on about Nipper? But the point I'm trying to make is there are some inconsistencies in between Darren's and Nipper's story. Initially, it did just sound like Steve had took what Darren had said and just took Mick and Jack out and put his dad and Damon instead. But that's not actually the case, because in Darren's version of events, Pat Tate is the one that smashed the broken window that we see in the photographs at the crime scene. There are different versions of how that window smashed, with the shot that grazed Pat's head smashing it. There's Pat's fist, or I would have guessed in my mind, I would have thought it would have been Pat's elbow, if anything. But in Darren's version of events, it's Pat's fist. But how would Darren know that, considering Darren wasn't down the lane? He's going on what Mick told him. But if Mick and Jack were never down there was never a conversation between Mick and Jack telling Darren what had gone on that evening, then how did Darren know about the broken glass? Also in the same conversation, or in the same statement, Darren states that Pat was squealing like a baby. Now, he may have picked that up from Steve Nipper Ellis's article with the Sun newspaper, which states they were given the choice to be taken apart bit by bit with an axe, or with a shot to the head. The headline from the Sun newspaper from the 13th of December 95 stated, "How do you want to die? A single shot or piece by piece with an axe?" Now, within this article, it states that Pat screamed like a baby, exactly what Darren Nichols' version of events stated when he was arrested. 6 months later, in 96. So in Steve's version of events, his dad walked round the back of the Range Rover and shot Pat through the glass, which wasn't broken.
David dead, one shot in the head. Then he's walked round the back of the Range Rover. Pat's on the window wasn't broke. Pat's like, he's crying, whimpering, whatever he was doing. He got shot in the head through the window. Then he walked back round, put another one in Tony's, put another one in Craig's.
Just reveal the glass splinters in Tate's head would indicate the window had been fired through and not hit through from the inside, just like Nichols had stated that Tate had done. But this story that Steve sold to the newspaper in December of 95, he actually admitted later on in the police interview it was a lie because he needed the money. That doesn't exactly fill you with confidence when it comes to this Q&A, that Nipper sold a story to the newspaper which was false for money. Now this was 26 years ago, just over 25. I mean, the story itself, given the choice, it doesn't really seem like a bit of a fair choice being taken apart bit by bit of an axe or shot in the back of the head. I mean, taking apart bit by bit of an axe, depending on where they're going to start, like your feet and toes, and gradually working up to the knees. I mean, what if they start with your ear or so? I mean, they could literally start with the smallest little chippings of just chipping your toenails away or so. Being taken apart bit by bit of an axe reminds me of like being stoned with pebbles. I mean, you can imagine how long it would take, but clearly they would have took the option to be shot. But the story came out to be a fabrication of Steve's mind when he needed money. In a police interview, he admitted that he sold the story just for cash. And I think that's what puts a lot of doubt in people's minds now, whether this is just for a book deal, just for a movie deal, or whether there's just some sort of payday somewhere in this. Because there's never been any conclusion of who murdered the three. Did Nipper literally see an opening and thought he could put his dad there? Or is there a hidden motive? Is he trying to get Damon Alvin to come out of the woodworks? Or is he trying to get the actual killer to reveal himself? Now, what does Jack know about what went on that evening? Does Jack know the finer details? I mean, would Jack know whether Steve is telling the truth or not? Or is he now just happy that the fact of someone else come forward with some sort of definitive answer of who killed the three? But what proof can Steve really bring? It is just literally the story that his dad told him. Now, somebody brought up something the other day in the Facebook group and did mention, what if Steve's dad told Steve that just to make him feel better? What if there's no truth in it? Or what if Steve's dad was there, saw what happened, and then put himself in the part of the shooter? When it comes down to Steve's book, when he found out about the murders, there's a different version to the Q&A. But obviously that would be the case because you wouldn't exactly write in the book that your dad did it. His dad was still alive. Then the book came out, I guess, in 2010, Last Man Standing. His version within the book states that when he found out, he phoned his dad and told him, and his dad was crying on the phone, and his daughter and his sisters were in the background cheering. But in the Q&A, Steve's dad phoned Sid, and Steve is the one that's crying on the phone in disbelief of what his dad had done. So there are two versions of the story, but like I say, he wouldn't write in his book exactly what went on. There are parts within the book that state that Steve got up that morning when he found out about the murders, which had been the 7th of December, and watched the coverage on the TV throughout the day, or the news reports. But the thing is, there wouldn't have actually been many news reports on the TV that morning. Only the initial headline. Any news conference, any reveal of who was shot in the car, in the Range Rover, didn't come out till a lot later that evening. I think it was that evening or even the next day. But could that be a slight exaggeration? Because remember, Steve was told to exaggerate in that book. Something that he didn't want to do. And if you watch Steve's Q&A, you'll see exactly what went on with the writing of that book. Now, back in January, when Steve came out with the Q&A and his big reveal, there was a poll on a Facebook group asking who believed Steve to be telling the complete truth and who thought he was only telling a part truth. Now, out of a poll of 1,388, 909 people believed that Nipper was telling the truth, with only 244 not believing him, with 235 believing it's partly true. Now, this was back at the beginning of January, and since then, opinions have changed a lot. There was a question put on a Facebook group the other day asking to see whether people had changed their minds in the last 5 weeks. And I noticed on a recent question to see who had changed their minds, quite a few people had changed their minds. I'm guessing it was the initial thinking about the interview, re-watching it, going over it in your minds and the general discussion within the groups. But quite a few people are now of the mind that it's just a fabrication. But why? If it's not true, why would Steve do that? Is it a money grab? Steve's got an alibi for that evening from his partner that he was in Dorset. Also mentions in his book that he was also down in Dorset as well. But in an interview in Essex called Essex Bad Boys, Steve stated that he was in Rettendon stealing a lorry. That's also put a bit of confusion in people's minds whether he was actually up there down the lane that night, saw what went on, or whether he really was in Dorset, but for some reason on the documentary stated he was in Rettendon. But why? There was quite a few people in the area of Rettendon that night. Someone that had also been bullied by them and threatened his life had decided to take his family and stay in a hotel. Now, think about it. You could have gone anywhere in England. Anywhere. Not even in England. You could have gone anywhere you wanted to. But that person chose to stay in a hotel, which was also in Rettendon. Sorry, it must have been a B&B, but it was also in Rettendon. Of all the places that person could go, there are people that believe that there were at least 10 people down the lane that night. Like a little audience. Like someone was down there probably selling popcorn and hot dogs. Maybe selling tickets for it. And with the amount of visitors the lane gets now, it kind of has turned into a tourist attraction with quite a few visiting on a daily basis. So if anyone out there's got a little hot dog stand or a little burger bar, you have a little word of Fearbold and give a little deal in that, or maybe candy floss or something, even brochures or sort of, I think merchandise, maybe a little badge, little Range Rover badge or T-shirts or something. I'm not quite sure, but it wouldn't surprise me. In my mind, it was the reason why Peter Fearbold changed the lane. Was it always his plan to change that lane, or was it because of all the people that kept coming onto that part of his land? So he thought, well, I might as well widen it so they've got a bit of room to get down so they can take photos and stuff. And the memorial at the end of the lane, which I stupidly did believe at one point for a split second it was a memorial for the 3 deceased. I thought maybe the families had come to some agreement with Peter to leave something down there. But if you visit the lane and go to the end of it, you'll see a memorial, which is for a war memorial. And there is an actual Jeep in the memorial, which at first glance, you think, well, that's not a Range Rover. But it really doesn't have anything to do with the 3 deceased. And when you really go down there, you can't even recognise that it is the actual original lane. If there is any truth in the whole story itself, which I'm not saying there isn't, I just find parts of it hard to believe, like the fourth person. And the person that wasn't mentioned because his family wouldn't like it. Who do you think that is? Why did he say family? Why did he not say this person would not like to have their name mentioned? He said the person's family. And there's two names that may be fitted in there, but one of them is in prison. So why wouldn't he say that the person wouldn't like it? The chances are that the person that he's mentioned, that his family wouldn't want to be mentioned, the person has passed. Who do you know around Steve Nipper Ellis has passed away? Anyone that has seen Nipper's interviews, especially the Truth documentary, and the first part of it, with Nipper's involvement discussing a certain person, then you may know who that possible fourth person was in the Range Rover. That's from Steve's story. Now, the only possible involvement with the person that I think he's mentioning is the Traveller's Check stories from a few years before the murders. Now, if you don't know about the Traveller's Check stories, it was the reason that Tony, Pat and Craig turned on Jimmy G in the Rise of the Foot Soldier movie. Jimmy G, of course, being Steve Nipper Ellis. And this is one of the questions that gets asked a lot on the Facebook group, is why was Jimmy G not just called Steve Ellis? Well, Steve was alive at the time, and apparently they just chose to choose Jimmy G instead of to try and get the licensing name and paying money and all that side of things. But why Welsh? No idea about that one. I know there is a reason why, but in the movie it's portrayed that that's the reason they turn on Steve, was because of the Traveller's Checks, but that's not the case. There is a story there, but that's not the reason within the movie. In the movie, the movie reason is the phone call between Tony's mistress and Steve, which then started the beef. The Traveller's Check stories is a friend of Steve, the one he won't mention on the interview, is he had some Traveller's Checks for sale for some other people. And Tony, Pat and Craig said they're interested, and they took an example. This is mentioned in Colton's book, and it's also mentioned in
He Who Shall Not Be Named
books. So Tony had an example of the Traveller's Checks, and they were fine. They cashed them fine. And they said they wanted the rest of them, and they arranged a few meetings, and the meetings didn't take place. They kept letting them down, the Traveller's Checks people. And it was winding up Tony even more. And in the end, they did turn up for a meet, and Colton and a bear hug, that's all I remember, and then getting away. And the people that were selling the Traveller's Checks were upset with Steve and thought it was a setup. And Steve had to go to them and say, look, it had nothing to do with me. They did it their own accord. So this was a reason why, if that fourth person, passenger, is who I think it is, and he is connected to the Traveller's Check stories, that they would have a reason to dislike Tony, Pat and Craig. And if Steve's story is true, and the information about the deal at Rettendon went through this person to see his dad, and it's Damon, then that would be the case. Whether that's true or not, we just don't know. But there is a connection there to the Ricky Percival case,